Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have on the line with us Drew Ryun. He's former deputy director of the RNC. He's the political director of the Madison Project. He also worked with Jay Sekulow, director of government affairs, for the American Center for Law and Justice. He's a twice published author. His appearance, our show, made possible by our friends at the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com, B-E-A-T, IRS, serving Alaskans Americans since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. Mr. Ryun, thank you for being on the Joe Miller Show. You mentioned right before we went on the air that you're expecting a tectonic shift in the race for president, probably out of the Republican field. What's going on?
I sure am, Joe. Great to be with you. But, yeah, we were chatting about that before I come on the air. I think we're starting to see a shift on the ground, especially in Iowa and South Carolina. So I think a lot of people are seeing Donald Trump as the prohibitive favorite, even at this, in a sense, late in the game. And I think we're going to start seeing some of that shifting back towards Ben Carson. And, frankly, I think we're going to see Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz come charging through the field. And we're starting to see that on the ground. In fact, we, the Madison Project, have some teams on the ground in Iowa right now. So I'm not just looking at polling number. I'm actually looking at the door-to-door survey results from us going and talking to current caucus goers, those that went to the caucuses in 2012, those that voted in the 2014 primary there in Iowa. We're looking at active, high-intensity voters, and we're starting to see some shifting on the ground that maybe is not hitting the front pages just yet.
It's interesting because a couple of weeks ago there were a flurry of articles suggesting that Donald Trump is here to stay. He basically dipped, and then he resurged. In other words, the analysis was people had buyer's remorse. They went out and looked at the field, and they decided that Trump was the best they could do. You're suggesting that maybe there's yet another kind of realignment taking place. Is it because of advertising? Like Cruz has lots of money in the bank. Are these candidates finally flexing their financial muscle, starting to get their message out, or is there something else at play here?
I think it's a combination. I think you are seeing, especially with Rubio and Cruz, both of them are flush. Their super PACs are flush with cash, which me being a Cruz fan, I'm thrilled to see. So I think they're starting to flex some of their muscle, use some of that money on the air, whether it's radio or television. I think with Donald Trump, look, I have to hand it to the guy. He is at least kind of capturing, in a sense, this populist rage against what's going on in Washington, D.C. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. However, when you kind of push Donald Trump as to what some of his details are and how he's going to make America great again, I think people are realizing, well, there might not be as much there as we initially thought. And I have to tell you, we still have several months out before even Iowa. And I think some people are starting to think, well, maybe we need somebody with a little bit more depth, a few more details. And I got to tell you what, here's how I think it's going to go right now, Joe. You're going to see Trump fade. I think you're going to see Carson go up to the top for a while. And then I think around the first of the year, I think this thing becomes a 3-horse race. It's going to be Carson, Rubio, and Cruz going into Iowa. And I think the one coming out of Iowa is going to be the one that has the momentum.
I agree with you to a certain extent. One of the things that we've seen, and of course, Alaska is not exactly a great example of the rest of the country. In some ways we are, and I'm not a Trump guy. I mean, I absolutely would vote for Trump in a heartbeat before Bush or Clinton.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I agree with
those
100%.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if it were those two establishment candidates, we'd take Trump in a heartbeat because his anti-establishment approaches, it overcomes the ego and the fact that he really has no foundation. But, the fact of it is he's got some staying power, and you can see that, at least on the ground where we're at here. I agree with you 100%. I mean, Cruz, he not only has organization and money, but he also is very articulate on the issues, and he knows them. Carson, I think you're right. He's going to continue to go up. I think that's in part a consequence of the fact that he is kind of another anti-establishment candidate. He's not obviously been crowned by the powers that be. But the problem, of course, is that, and this is why I agree also that he's going to go back down, is he's a bit naive. I mean, he is tangling with, and of course, he's a quick learner. Nobody's going to suggest he's not. But this is a field that he's completely unfamiliar with, and he's demonstrated slip-ups in the past. I'm sure that those will continue, and I think that's going to ultimately hurt him. Rubio, okay, I'll buy that too, because what you've got with Jeb Bush, of course, is a little bit of buyer's remorse from the establishment, I think. They believe that he's now damaged goods to the extent that his connection to the past Bush administration and the establishment is too much, and that they might be able to fool enough people with Rubio. So the only area of disagreement is the fact I think Trump's still going to call on a fairly significant percentage. The horse race is a reality, though. That's on.
Yeah, I agree with you, Joe. And here's this. I don't think Donald Trump's going to completely fade. I don't think we're going to see the strong numbers that we're seeing currently from Donald Trump. But Will that go down to 15%? Will that go down to 10% as we turn the corner into the first of the year? My money is on yes, we will see that. The other thing you mentioned just a second ago, Jeb Bush. I think what we're seeing too is, yes, you're seeing these campaigns that are flush with super PAC money. I mean, Jeb Bush is still leading the race with super PAC money. But as we saw with Scott Walker, the hard dollar reigns supreme in these campaigns. And that's why I got to tell you, on the PR side of things, Marco Rubio, on the issues, Ted Cruz, on the hard dollar front, both of them, on the super PAC front, both of them. Frankly, I mean, honestly, I could think of a far worse ticket than the two of them together. I think each one of them shores up the other's weakness. Rubio puts forward a great PR. Cruz kind of shores up maybe some of Rubio's weakness. Who can forget the Gang of Eight bill? And I think it's going to be a formidable tandem if those are the two that actually end up coming out of this presidential primary and potentially become a combined ticket. I don't know. I mean, I'm just ripping from this far out, but I like the odds of those two charging through the field right now because I've got to think that, as you said, Carson, he's a little bit light on the issues. He's a good man. He really is a good man, but he's a little light on the issues. Donald Trump, he's going to fade. He's going to have some staying power, but I really think it might already be down to Rubio and Cruz.
Excellent analysis. One of the things that has been quite curious over the last several weeks, actually it extends into the months, is the apparent alliance between Cruz and Trump. There's a non-aggression treaty of sorts that many have ferreted out from their public interactions. What's your take on that?
Honestly, I think it's a great move by both of them. What's the point of Donald Trump trying to hit Ted Cruz and Ted Cruz trying to hit Donald Trump? There's really no cause for it. And I think both of them understand the strengths that each one of their, in a sense, coalitions bring. I think there's some admiration there on both ends, to be honest with you as well. So I just think both of them have come to an agreement, whether it's actually tacit or if they've actually agreed to this in person, that they're just not going to hit each other. And I think it's actually a really smart tactic on both sides.
It's so unlike Trump, though. I mean, look at what he's doing with Carson right now.
Right. Well, and look at what he did with Rand Paul in that last debate. I mean, that was the end of Rand Paul. I'm sorry. I mean, I love the libertarians, but I mean, when your guy gets punched that hard in the first 30 seconds of a debate and really doesn't have a response, he's done. And obviously there are other campaign mechanics where he's failing as well. But Donald Trump really, he's a headhunter. I mean, this guy, he goes for it. And you're right, he hasn't touched Ted Cruz. And I think, again, it goes down to the fact there is a mutual admiration that's going on between the two of them. And really, what's the point? Why hit each other?
I don't think any candidate that has embraced immigration, I should say amnesty, can survive. And that's why I think that Rubio, even though he does have establishment support, he's going to pull that 25%. The fact is he is going to get bludgeoned on that. And that's one of the beauties of Trump's candidacy is it's brought that issue front and center so that it is clearly an issue that voters must consider in this presidential season.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think it's going to be a foremost issue, which is why I think if it does come down to a Cruz and a Rubio, I don't see Rubio being the top of the ticket at all. And simply it's because of that issue and because he was forced out in front by Mitch McConnell and, frankly, took the banner himself to push that Gang of Eight immigration bill. And I got to tell you what, voters have long memories, especially when it comes to the issue of immigration and amnesty.
So Hillary Clinton, we just have about 2.5 minutes left in this segment. She is surprising pundits. I mean, she's always been articulate, smart, very deceitful. I think that it's not too strong of a word to call her a liar. We certainly saw that in the hearings this week. But she is a smooth operator, and her base, I think, has expanded as a consequence of her recent public appearances, not only before Benghazi, the committee, and the House last week, but also the most recent debate. What's your take on her as a candidate, as a nominee for the Democrats? Is she a fearsome quantity to be contested against?
Yes, absolutely. When you look at the Clintons, I mean, I can't think of better politicians, and I use that in a somewhat pejorative way. You can't ask for better politicians than the Clintons. She's got a great campaign. She's got great fundraising still. And frankly, the thing that's going to help her the most, I think, is the third element, a very weak field. I mean, really, Bernie Sanders, you look down the line, if there was a strong, young, vibrant candidate running against her, I think Hillary Clinton would face the 2008 problem and would be beaten by, in a sense, the next Barack Obama. But I think she's going to benefit greatly from a very weak field on their side. And then you add to the fact that great fundraising, they're great politicians. She is going to be formidable. I mean, I think a lot of people have to understand, especially conservatives, she has a locked-in constituency of 46 to 47%. Mitt Romney said it poorly, but it's true. So she's really going to have to persuade about 6%, if that, of the general population. Those are formidable odds for anybody on the Republican side to overcome.
And Bernie has basically tipped his hat to her. I mean, that email comment at the debate, that was basically saying, you're going to be the nominee. I'm not going to hit you on the major issue that's before the voters right now. It amazes me in looking. We just have 30 seconds here, so I'll wrap it up. But it's amazing to me to look at how the youth have just embraced Bernie Sanders. I mean, here's a guy that is, I mean, an avowed, self-avowed socialist. The stuff he talks about is more government action. It is frightening. Listening to, was it Red Eye last night? There was something on Fox that was talking about this kind of shift of opinion away from anything even closely connected with capitalism. It's a worry that any conservative candidate has coming up in the future. There's a big block of voters that seem to be lost. Stay with us. Going to talk more with Drew Ryun after these messages. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. I have with us Drew Ryun, former deputy director of the RNC. He's also the political director now for the Madison Project. He also served as the director of government affairs for Jay Sekulow, the American Center for Law and Justice. He's a twice published author. Active with a number of different groups, Super PAC supporting Ted Cruz, launched Media Trackers in 2011. That's a nonprofit investigative news site. And we've really enjoyed having him on last segment, talking about the presidential run. We're going to talk now about Paul Ryan and the effort to crown him Speaker. Drew, tell us a little bit about what's going on the ground at the House right now. Obviously, the Freedom Caucus under fire by the grassroots, given the fact that it looks like they're going to support him for Speaker. Tell us what's going on, what your take is on it.
Well, yeah, just a little background on Paul Ryan, and I'm sure that you've discussed him over the last few days, but for folks that don't know, first elected in the House in 1998. He actually had been the former chief of staff for now Kansas Governor, then Senator Sam Brownback. You know, he came in with a lot of promise. He was kind of the new face of conservatism. He was going to be the young standard bearer. He was, I think, 29 years old when he was first elected. But I got to tell you, Joe, within the first term or two, we quickly saw who was going to become the real Paul Ryan when he started voting for No Child Left Behind and Medicare Part D, all these major government expansions. You go on down to TARP. You go into INDA, and I think that's really one that strikes a nerve with me is the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and that really puts a lot of religious organizations on their heels because of hiring practices. So you look on down the line, and so when people say that Paul Ryan's a conservative, I'm like, I beg to differ. He's a Republican. He's voted the party line, yes, but that doesn't make him a conservative. And I really do think voting records matter, Joe. I mean, I think that's really the only standard that you can judge elected officials by. They can say whatever they want to, and frankly, I think a lot inside the Republican Party establishment have become experts at telling the voters what they want to hear. They really have no intent of actually going and governing that way, and I think Paul Ryan is the epitome of that. So right now he's being kind of de facto crowned the successor of John Boehner after we saw Kevin McCarthy's attempt to become the next speaker just come to a burning halt. But I have to tell you, I mean, I think there's kind of this bubble effect that's going on in Washington, D.C. when you have these would-be Fox News pundits and relative, conservatives. They're saying Paul Ryan's, he's the best that we can do. We've got to get him elected as Speaker of the House. And I have to tell you that some of these guys inside the House Freedom Caucus are like, you know what, maybe he is the best we can do. I personally differ. And I think that, frankly, Paul Ryan could be worse than John Boehner, simply because he's been given so much street credit as a conservative that he will be given a lot of leeway in the decisions that he makes. But I have to tell you, we were talking about Marco Rubio in the last segment. You look at a guy who's probably worse on immigration and amnesty, it's Paul Ryan. So we're going to see, I think, a vote here at the end of this week, and we'll find out who the next speaker is going to be. But right now, I think it is going to be Paul Ryan, and that's going to be quite the story to unfold here over the next few months.
Well, we had a guest on last week who was actually present outside of the conference room in which the Freedom Caucus was meeting and voting on Paul Ryan, and apparently a supermajority is supporting Paul Ryan, which is really shocking to many of us. Man, I've got a number of friends in the Freedom Caucus that are hardcore, solid conservatives that have taken stands against the established time and time again. Many of them, of course, have suffered even the loss of chairmanships in the process. Right. And the way it's been explained to me is, look, Paul Ryan has made commitments, and we believe he's a man of integrity, to actually change procedural aspects of the House, which will allow the members to regain control of much of the process. What do you say to that argument? That, look, this is a guy that's actually going to change the way things are done in the House so conservatives can regain control.
Well, I mean, and when they're saying that, here's what they're actually alluding to, Joe, is the steering committee and how it was under the John Boehner, and I'll say regime and use that word exactly as I intended. The John Boehner regime, the steering committee, that the speaker actually had 5 selections. He could put 5 members on the steering committee, including himself. So basically, he and his guys decided what pieces of legislation, which amendments were germane, what was coming through steering committee would actually see light of day on the House floor. And I think when they're talking about these rules changes, that's really what it centers around. And I would say in return, well, Dan Webster, who's the other gentleman in the conversation that's running for Speaker from Florida, he's agreed to that as well. And he has a much better voting record. He's not a rock-rib conservative. Let's make no mistake. Neither one of them is. But I think Dan Webster has more of an inclination to actually govern as a conservative. And yet I think he would be acceptable to the establishment wing as well. I think the danger with a Paul Ryan is this. As he gives, in a sense, kind of these small favors to conservatives in exchange for their votes, you look at the big-ticket items that he will likely move, that he will tacitly support, again, like immigration and all these, this is the guy, again, that voted for TARP and all these major government expansion bills, intrusion into private citizens' lives. How can we actually expect him, now that he actually has, in a sense, these levers of power, that he will govern as a conservative? I don't see it at all.
So with respect to those that are actually fighting Paul Ryan,
right,
that are making a lot of noise in the House, can you give us some names?
Yeah, I think Steve King out of Iowa is making a fantastic case, saying, look, if immigration is the issue of this election cycle, and we were talking about it last segment, it is, thanks to Donald Trump. If it's the issue, how can you actually put somebody into power that is palling around with Luis Gutierrez? And for those of your listeners that aren't familiar with Luis Gutierrez, he's a congressman out of Illinois. He's just not a left-wing congressman. This is a guy that pals around with La Raza, that pals around with FLN, basically communist front groups. This is the kind of person that Paul Ryan will go and make public appearances with regarding immigration reform and amnesty. So you look at that and you're thinking, wait, if we don't like Marco Rubio running for president, a lot of conservatives, because of his Gang of Eight position, how in the world can we then accept Paul Ryan as a conservative and actually trust him on immigration? And Steve King is really making the case there. Louis Gohmert out of Texas is as well. And there are a few other members that are really starting to push. Jim Bridenstine's one of my favorites out of Oklahoma. He's like, I'm not buying it.
Great guy.
Great guy. So, there are some that are stalwarts. And I tell you what, Joe, we are making progress. But there's still a lot of work to do in the House. Just the way that we're shifting the climate, getting rid of John Boehner, stopping Kevin McCarthy. Whether we get past this Paul Ryan hurdle or not, I don't know. But, that's one thing is I think a lot of grassroots conservatives have to understand these men are human. They will make mistakes. And I think up to this point they've done a lot of good things for the conservative movement in getting rid of John Boehner and stopping Kevin McCarthy.
I wanted to just ask you real quick, about the concern that many have about if, in fact, there is not an acceptable candidate that the Freedom Caucus gets behind, that then John Boehner et al. Will go across the aisle, actually reach a coalition decision with the Democrats, and be in a much worse position thereafter.
There's always that possibility. I have to tell you, though, personally, I think John Boehner wanted to get out of town, so to speak, and Eric Cantor lost to Dave Bratt, which was just phenomenal. In a sense, forced his hand to stick around. I think he wanted to basically hand the crown over to Eric Cantor. He's kind of been in a placeholder situation. I don't see John Boehner personally wanting to stick around. However, that whole idea of the establishment guys finding somebody that's acceptable to the Democrats and creating, in a sense, their form of coalition government, it's always possible.
What are we expecting with respect to the power or leverage of the Freedom Caucus, Tea Party Caucus? Do you think, obviously, they scored big hits in not just forcing Boehner's resignation, but also then assuring that McCarthy wasn't going to go any further? Is it dependent on how they address the Paul Ryan issue, or do you think they're on this upward trajectory now, kind of a revitalization of the Tea Party, if you will?
I think it's a revitalization. Obviously, how they address the Paul Ryan situation is going to impact, I think, their efficacy with the grassroots and how much the grassroots believes them going forward. But I tell you what, 40 votes is not inconsiderable. I don't care how big the majority is in the House for the Republicans. When you have a block of 40 votes, really it only takes right now in the current climate 28 votes to take down a rule. So they could basically stop a bill from getting to the floor with the 40 that they have if they stick together. And I think that's going to be the biggest problem for them with the Jim Jordans and others that are leadership at the House Freedom Caucus, is keeping everybody together all the time. So it's going to be interesting. We'll see how it plays out.
You mentioned ENDA earlier. It's something that Paul Ryan supported. Just so that listeners are clear on this, this could require people of faith to hire people that they disagree with, such as homosexual, transvestite, transgendered. You just named the whole alphabetized, sexual practices crowd. The fact is, it's something that it's just shocking that anybody that self-describes as a conservative could support. What are you seeing as far as ENDA, whether or not it's going to pass out in this Congress? Is there a move afoot to do that?
I haven't seen anything yet, Joe, but you just nailed it on the head. And I hear this from the Paul Ryan apologists. Well, everybody has some bad votes here and there. I'm like, well, yes, but when you have 17 years of a bad voting record, and supporting all these issues that you said, they're an anathema to the conservative movement, like ENDA and on down the line. How many more passes are we going to give this guy before we actually strip the term conservative from him? I did that years ago, and I think it's time for the grassroots and, frankly, a lot of the pundits to strip conservative away from Paul Ryan. Sure, you want to call him a rising Republican star, fine, do that. But we got to strip conservative away from him and actually let him stand on his voting record that he's accumulated over the last 2 years.
Well, Drew, I really appreciate your insight. Something that we need an update on from time to time. Would appreciate you coming back on the show in the future. Keep us up to date on this. Look forward to seeing what you're doing with the Super PAC and how this field develops on the presidential side of it. I agree with you. I think there's going to be some shifts coming. Should be exciting to watch.
Joe, great to be with you. Would love to come back on.
All right, thanks again. Drew Ryan, we'll be back. The Joe Miller Show after these messages. Stay with us.